Welcome to another presentation with Learning with ISRAR at ISRAR channel of YouTube. Today our topic is tendering and procurement, in which we will try to talk about tender definition, tendering process, purposes of tendering, characteristics of tender, types of tender, stages in tendering process, and e-tendering. To understand the role of tendering process in procurement, it is better to define the term procurement first, as most of my audiences know that procurement is the process of sourcing, acquiring, and paying for goods and services. While many organizations use terms like procurement, purchasing, and sourcing interchangeably, actually these are different components of the total procurement function. After defining procurement, now let's define tendering. It is the process wherein the organization to invite suppliers to submit their proposals or bids for the goods and services required. This invitation is usually called a request for tender, RFT. As we have noticed in the definition of procurement, sourcing and acquisition are the major part of procurement process, and tendering is the process used to source and acquire these goods and services. So now we can say that tendering is the tool or an instrument used to source, acquire or procure the goods and services. Before going further, let's define what is tender. A tender, also known as an invitation to tender or ITT, is a written request sent out to potential suppliers inviting them to submit an application to allow them to deliver specific goods or services. Before explaining the types and process of tendering, let's find out why do we need tendering to purchase goods and services. Here are a few of the purposes of tendering. To get the best possible value for money. To get the best service. To evaluate quality and price according to market. To get the most competitive value from the marketplace. To understand about the alternatives available in the market. To have control over quality and prices. To set detailed service level agreements. Tenders should have the following characteristics. The process of tendering starts with an invitation to tender or a request for tender, RTF. Tenders are generally advertised in a different local media and newspapers, allow all interested suppliers an opportunity to bid for the project. All potential suppliers must submit their bids within the deadline decided on by the client. The bid, tender papers, must include all the required and relevant details about the materials to be used, the expected cost of the project, etc. It should end with the evaluation process and follows by which one of the firms that submitted a tender wins the project or contract. Next is the classification of the tenders. The first one is open tender, everyone who is interested invited to quote the rates. Then, limited tender, only a selected number of contractors are invited to quote their rates. The third one is single tender. Invitation is given to only one firm to render a service by quoting their rates. If the quoted rates are high, it will be negotiated prior to the agreement of the contract. Then, rate contract, usually adopted for supply of materials, machine, tools and plant, etc. It specifies the supply at a fixed rate during the period of contract. The quantities are not mentioned in type of contract, and the contractor is bound to accept any order which would be placed before him, but it depends upon the tendering organization's rules and regulations. Pretender stage. Tender advertisement stage. Closing of tender. Tender opening and evaluation process. Tender award. After discussing the tender types and characteristics, now we will discuss the most important topic of the session, which is stages of tendering process. A typical tendering process includes the following stages. Tendering process starts with the pre-tendering phase, which entails the identification of needs, the planning and the budgeting, the project preparation including the definition of the requirements and the choice of procedure type. In the tender notice, the basic requirements should appear are title of the project, class of contractor, head, and subhead needed, location, date, and time to obtain the tender document, fees for tender documents, location, date and time of submission. After planning stage, next is the tender advertisement, which is also called tender notice, which is advertised in the local newspaper and the media. Next stage is tender closing, which means the date and time specified in the tender form is the latest date and time before which tenders must be deposited with the client. Opening. A report prepared to describe the findings of the said evaluation, and it will be supported by tables and graphs. In the end, it will recommend which tenderer is the most suitable to undertake to execute the project, undertaken objectively, consistently and without bias toward particular suppliers. Then tenders are generally evaluated against a predetermined set of criteria. The evaluation of the tender shall be prepared the soonest as possible after the tender. After submission and deadline, the next stage is tender opening and evaluating process. Usually a committee of 2 members handle the tender opening process to ensure the integrity of the competitive process. The evaluation of proposals must be in the manner agreed to and at the price offered, and the client must pay the agreed price at the agreed time. The tendering process completes with tender awarding. The tender results notification, which is in letter form and then sent to all participating contractors. Once the client accepts a tender, it is binding on both parties, means that the suppliers who won the tender has to provide the goods or services. The last stage is tender award. Once the contract has been finalized and work has been awarded, both the successful and unsuccessful tenderers will be notified in the tender award to the particular contractor or supplier. The tender administrator creates. This was a very brief explanation about e-tendering. I will try to discuss it in detail in any of my next sessions. E-tendering lets bidders submit required information in response to a formal request for proposal, RFP, by a deadline, generates and exchanges documents with e-signatures and messaging, and evaluates bidding suppliers for the procurement opportunity. An internet-based, online, or mobile software platform that may include a portal when a buyer issues an invitation to tender, ITT, or notice inviting tender, NIT, to potential suppliers who respond to the purchase request. Before ending the topic, let's touch base with e-tendering. E-tendering or electronic tendering is the process of using online procurement or e-procurement platforms to automatically solicit bid tenders and evaluate suppliers, which works through. This was a brief explanation about tender and tendering process in the procurement. If you have any question, please feel free to write in comments section. Thanks for your time and listening. Take care.